The Wild West is a supremely underutilized setting for horror. In fact, I'm surprised at just how underutilized it is when horror period pieces have become increasingly popular over the years. In its most primitive form, the Wild West was a time of lawlessness, savagery, and desperation. It was the brink of power, conflict, and corruption as mankind sought immense change and innovation in both their ways of living and thinking. To put it lightly, it was a pretty complicated and provocative time in history, but as the setting for horror, there is no better encapsulation of American mystery, macabre, superstition, and morality than everything that happened between 1600 and 1900. I love a good western, whether it be the white wine spritzer, yeehaw, whatever that guilty pleasure Will Smith movie was, to the type of film we're going to talk about today, the Red Dead, Tombstone, Coen brother, Clint Eastwood, Cormac McCarthy, or to put it simply, pure fucking misery. Depending on my mood, I particularly love a feel-bad western because besides the fact they paved the way for many gangster flicks, exploitation flicks, and to be honest, a lot of contemporary 70s horror films I really love, they just get to that rotten core of fuck, mankind really is its own monster. Now, for context, the original idea for this video was to do something summer themed, and that seemed like a good opportunity to do a western because barren settings and whatnot, and I'm guessing already there's like a dozen comments bringing up Bone Tomahawk, and yes, that was originally what I was going to review, however, I also like weird, obscure curveballs, so instead, we're going to talk about a now 20-year-old western supernatural horror that I was pretty convinced was a fever dream. It's the kind of movie that starts, and before you know it, it's over, and before you have any time to process it, you're left thinking, wait, what the hell just happened? So, let me introduce you to Dead Birds. Before we dive into the madness, this video is sponsored by Raycon. As some of you may know, I play dodgeball for Ireland, and by the time you see this, I'll be traveling to Austria to compete in the World Championships. However, getting to this point took tremendous hard work, a lot of training, a lot of rehab, a lot of mental management, and I genuinely went through the entire process with Raycon everyday earbuds. These bad boys have been my go-to distraction to get me through all the stress, pain, and endurance, as their lightweight ergonomic design maintains a comfortable fit for extended play sessions, allowing me to seamlessly transition from doing weights and cardio to crying in the locker room. But as their name suggests, Raycons function for everyday activities, from commuting to work to chilling on the couch to enjoying casual summer walks, not just drowning out horrible gym music so I can listen to the soothing melancholic sounds of the National. In particular, I love their active noise cancellation mode as it allows me to block out all background sound and immerse myself in music to maintain focus and an easy listening experience. With up to 32 hours of battery life in their wireless charging case, Raycon's new and improved model has quick charge functionality where 10 minutes of charging yields 90 minutes of battery, which is amazing for me when I forget to charge the night before and Jetter is impatiently desperate for his morning walk. Available in several stylish colors and with a 30-day happiness guarantee, you can get yourself a pair of Raycons today and help out my channel by clicking the link in the description box below or going to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 20 to 40% off your order plus free shipping. Dead Birds tells the story of a gang of Confederate deserters who, along with an army medic and former slave, rob a bank during a military gold deposit and proceed to murder everyone inside before hiding out at a seemingly abandoned plantation on their way to Mexico. However, as luck would have it, the situation only grows increasingly dire as the gang succumb to paranoia as the strange and barbarically wicked history of the house begins to reveal itself in the form of insidious creatures and spirits that occupy the cursed land. Now, given the context of its setting, it should not surprise you that Dead Birds is a grotesque and nasty film, where the caveat is that you're not supposed to like any of these people. In the simplest terms, it's a film about wicked people getting their comeuppance at the hands of a wickedness that's worse than them. There are no saints or redemption arcs, as much as the film may try. Everyone is a sinner too late to change who they are, and the justice that's slowly served is not exactly exactly what I would call satisfying, but rather a case of when evil begets evil. That's not to say the film doesn't have a satisfying conclusion, but it will definitely polarize people just how ambiguous much of the story is. While it does give you the general explanation for what's happening, you'll get more mileage out of it if you're the sort of person who loves theorizing and interpreting small bits of information and lore. The story is basically framed as two completely unrelated events that just happen to collide, even if there is a vague connection eventually given to them, and I actually think it works all the better for it, because you end up trying to latch meaning onto the madness by way of twisted poetic justice, despite the evil ultimately just being as blunt and inconsequential as the gang's own actions. Actually, now that I think of it, the best way I can describe Dead Birds is Event Horizon set in the Wild West. It's clunky, schlocky, and unpolished, but has a few ambitious elements like a wrathful depiction of biblical themes fitting its time period, and a demonic cosmic evil that exists for no other purpose than to torment the mere mortals foolish enough to step foot on its land. The story is set in the midst of the American Civil War in Alabama in 1863, where the setting is established as murky, barren, cold, and overcast, with death and disease being seemingly rampant, as though to insinuate the dark and cursed nature of the land and its history. It's also just Alabama in the 1800s. The gang consists of their leader William, his lover Annabelle, his younger brother Sam, a former slave called Todd, and two other deserters called Joseph and Clyde, the former of whom will henceforth be referred to as Michael Shannon because it's fucking Michael Shannon. When they arrive in town, the gang are almost immediately confronted by other Confederates aware of their desertion, but the Confederates' scorn is met with a jarring outburst of violence when the gang go from a simple stick-up to rob the army's gold to outright brutally murdering almost every witness in their path, with Sam being injured in the shootout while William accidentally kills a kid in the crossfire of their escape. This latter detail is initially shown to be significant, as the film attempts to add a human conflict and complexity, where you're meant to feel somewhat vaguely sympathetic for William as now tormented with the guilt of killing a child. But here's the thing, it's difficult to buy into his moral quandary that plagues him for the majority of the runtime, when he, as the gang's leader, initiated the violence in the first place. Look, I would be absolutely behind a moral conflict if the murders were the result of a botched robbery where William did not intend for there to be any casualties, but before they even entered the bank, they murdered two soldiers outside, and William, while not physically instigating the violence, doesn't react in a manner that suggests it wasn't already part of his plan. In fact, the gang is not even met with any real threatening resistance, bar an impulsive response by one of the soldiers who naturally reaches for their gun when threatened inside the bank. The soldiers outside might be aware of their desertion, but react with indifference as though they want to avoid conflict out of pure exhaustion for violence. I can't tell if it's a problem with the actor's performance or a lack of direction in general, but yeah, while William does look nervous, as you naturally would be, robbing the fucking military, and it does go on to suggest the gang are selfish misfits operating haphazardly as though William doesn't have much control over their actions in the first place, all it ultimately does is establish William as a hypocrite rather than someone with doubts or reservations about his own actions. It seemed to me like the idea of this morality play was to potentially set William up as eventually finding redemption in stopping the evil of the plantation, but by the end, I swear to God, it forgets about all of this and there's no resolution to it, making it all just one big egregious red herring. William is even tormented by a nightmare from his time in the Civil War infirmary, where he is attacked by a badly injured man called Jeffy for basically stealing his fiancée Annabelle, which is a complicated history we never learn about, but there is some sort of purpose to it that I'll come to later. Although deep down, for as convoluted as the reasoning actually is, I assume the point of the scene was to serve a more symbolic introspective purpose, where William's time in the war left him so traumatized and disillusioned by all the meaningless violence, death, and suffering that he devolved into an outlaw as a means of both escaping such hell and realizing there's little point to being a morally righteous human when humanity seems to be lost in the midst of conflict. Given the film tries to add some sort of moral complexity to William, yet fails to follow through with it, the idea of humanity being poisoned by the evil, cruelty, and wickedness of both man and monster is the most persistent theme on display, and it's only accentuated further when the gang arrive at the deserted plantation, which irradiates death all around it. The supernatural is surprisingly quick to reveal itself when the gang are suddenly attacked by this mutated sphinx cat thing outside a dead cornfield, but before they question it, they end up distracted by a scarecrow that seemingly resembles a crucified man, which I'm sure will not come into play later in the story. Now, for as sassy as I'm being, the movie does a great job at setting up this dreary, dire, otherworldly tone. I wasn't going to say it has purgatory vibes because I practically say it in almost every video, but given how things play out, it's still kinda there. There is some further light internal conflict established in the share of the gold, as Michael Shannon tries to manipulate the feeble-minded Joseph into killing the other gang members so they can split the take 50-50, because as they say, there's no honor among thieves. However, before they can enact such a plan, ghostly happenings begin to occur, as Todd and William discover human bones in the basement, presumed to be that of slaves, along with a mysterious per man's Necronomicon. I mean, seriously, it is a straight up copy and paste from Evil Dead, minus the lore and provocative flesh-covered binding. From this, it doesn't take much to work out the general idea of what's happening, as it starts to unravel that the plantation owner may have been an aficionado of demonic rituals for reasons I'll explain later. But what's most compelling is the evidence that whoever once lived in this plantation may have transformed into strange creatures like the one the gang killed outside the dead cornfields. Granted, this brings us to the debatable issue of how this spooky house of jumpscares, much like Grave Encounters, relies heavily on that After Effects scary face that was later popularized by Video Copilot, which you may be familiar with if you were an indie filmmaker in the mid-2000s. Literally almost every setup devolves into guy with revolver and lantern following a strange shadow, noise and/or figure, but for a low-budget direct-to-video release, I actually think some of the deformed faces are legitimately striking, especially the semi-experimental flashback that comes much later in the film that, reminiscent of Event Horizon, positively leaves you wanting more. Although it is worth bearing in mind I'm a sucker for early mid-2000s nostalgic schlock, but their inherently jarring nature left me questioning if they were even real or not. They look like demons wrapped in husks of human skin, which perfectly mirrors the Scarecrow as a scary humanoid with no soul in it. Sam in particular ends up getting the brunt of the hauntings given he's mostly bedbound with his injury, and his only defense is to pray away the spirit of the plantation owner, who literally begins confessing his crimes, so let's address that. Basically, the plantation owner attempted to use black magic to resurrect his deceased wife, which involved barbarically flailing and sacrificing his slaves. However, it's revealed he was seemingly tricked into performing rituals that unleashed demons that gradually possessed his children, turning them into deformed monsters that he eventually had no choice but to kill. In retaliation for the evil that now plagues the land, the locals sacrificed the plantation owner, and thus the Scarecrow from the beginning is in fact his real corpse. At least that's what I think is going on. The movie doesn't really do a good job at explaining it, with one detail that goes unaddressed is the implication that the gang were baited into staying at the plantation by the injured man Jeffy, who inherited the land from the owner, who happened to be his grandfather. If you do piece the small fragments of information together, it does help give context to William's nightmare as a product of how the demons are said to torment their victims, and it is very much possible that Jeffy told them about the plantation as revenge for William stealing his fiancée. My working theory is that ever since, the demons are trying to leave the land by possessing new hosts, but have yet to successfully do so, as confirmed by the one the gang killed before entering the plantation, which insinuates the gang are not the first to fall victim to this demonic curse. Again, much of this is largely open to interpretation because what we see is largely shown rather than told, but some of the imagery is just too ambiguous to be explicitly clear what it's trying to say. Anyway, perhaps the most grisly scene is when Todd enters the basement again and sees the spirit of a sacrificed slave trying to desperately warn him of the evil, only for the slave to be viciously disemboweled by an unseen entity, and I was left thinking, fucking hell, movie. I know the bank robbery was jarringly violent, but I did not expect such an Event Horizon moment. Eventually, Sam is possessed possessed by the plantation owner and dies soon after, while Joseph is killed early on by one of the children, and Michael Shannon, well, we'll get to him. After everything they've been through, they finally decide to leave the house, but find that their horses are mutilated, and Will decides to, for some reason, go back to the house to find the gold. Again, it completely forgets his moral quandary, and what ensues is a rather rushed climax. Todd, understandably, has a breakdown with witnessing all the madness, such as the deceased wife of the plantation owner turning into a demon, and bails into the cornfield only to encounter a demonic Sam who vanquishes him into the fucking Netherrealm. I'm sorry, what the hell just happened? I guess maybe Todd was technically the most redeemable of the gang, so the demons couldn't possess him maybe, but if that's the case and morality comes into play, firstly, why is William not part of this? And secondly, why would they possess the wife and kids unless they're also little shitheads? And what makes the horror work is that it cannot be explained. Now, to be fair, I don't think it's that bad. I actually like that it's just this weird cosmic demon stuff, and I think it saves itself when it's revealed that Michael Shannon's abhorrently racist character is then found crucified with his eyes and mouth sewn shut, reminiscent of the child's toy he found earlier in the story, with his body decaying. Not only does it further play into the demonic children tormenting their victims, but it plays into a detail about Michael Shannon's character mockingly scaring Joseph earlier in the story, where he then scares Will and Annabelle, who then instinctively boots his head clean off. It is really satisfying. The final two survivors are then separated, and before you know it, Will thinks he's being attacked by a demon and accidentally kills Annabelle. If you're confused by everything that happened in such a short space of time, don't worry, it's only going to get more confusing, because the next morning, the gang's dog begins aggressively barking at Will and soon gives chase, with Will believing the dog is now a demon, and upon exiting the cornfield, he is shot dead by Confederates who've been tracking the gang since the robbery. However, what the Confederates see is not Will, but the same demon Sphinx cat thing that the gang killed when they first arrived at the plantation. What does this mean? Well, it's basically suggested that the gang, or at least most of them, were possessed since they first arrived, and the vicious cycle is doomed to repeat itself as a search party wanders towards the house in search for the gold. I guess thematically you could say it's trying to make a point about how people are blinded by what they become and that man and monster are practically the same thing, but let's just admit it, I'm overthinking it at this point and trying to add meaning to the madness. Look, regardless of how you see it, Dead Birds is this weirdly curious little horror film that was made on a clearly limited budget, so if you're into light cosmic horror demonic stuff, this might be your kind of thing, so check it out. And until next time, stay safe, stay away from racism, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.